Good evening to you. This is Janie Lazar here for Much More Than Words. I've been carrying out conversations with some remarkable people over quite a few months now, and I have today in our Zoom studio, if you like, Mary Jo Quigley. Mary Jo lives in Tralee in County Kerry in Ireland, and I have Catherine White. Thank you, Catherine, for interpreting for us. A little bit of explanation at the beginning. My interest in the deaf community, it came about by accident in one of the projects that I'm involved in. And suddenly I realized, as a hearing person in, if you like, a predominantly hearing world, I realized how little I knew about the deaf community. Not only the deaf community, the deaf and coda communities. And really the purpose of this is for me to talk to different people, hear from them, their stories, how they got involved, why they were involved, and to tell their families' stories. So Mary Jo, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to chat with me. And I'm going to pass directly over to you because, as I say, I've interviewed a few people, but some of them have been overseas. And your upbringing was very much an Irish upbringing at a very different time in Ireland. So if you could just really, I suppose, take us right back to the beginning.
Will I talk about my parents and how they met before I
Yeah,
was born?
I
Yes.
mean, it's always very, very interesting because the younger generations now haven't a clue as to what life was like then.
Yeah, yeah. But I always, I suppose, Mum would always tell the story, and when I was growing up, it was always very relevant. And hearing people would say, "Well, how did your parents meet?" And because I'm an only child, I suppose it was a little bit, different. But how it happened was in 1950, it was what's called the Holy Year. And the two schools, St. Joseph's for the deaf boys and St. Mary's Dominicans for the deaf girls, they organized a pilgrimage with something like, I'm not sure about the number. It could be 150, it could be 300, I don't know, but I still have the photographs from that time. And they went to Paris and to Rome. And they went by ship, and they went by train, and no flying way back then. And Mum bought a water bottle in Rome because it was so hot, and I still have it hanging here. It's got woven reeds all around it, and then a lovely leather strap on it. And it's in some of the photographs that we have of that time. But what she said was that on the train, that she saw my father. He was very tall, very handsome. But Daddy used to make a lot of images of animals with his handkerchief, like a rabbit, or I've forgotten now. This is because it was so amusing when I was growing up, and he would just stand in front of the mirror or in front of a window and with the handkerchief. And so he was amusing himself, doing this, and that attracted her to him. And then little by little during the trip, which went on for, I think it was nearly 2 weeks, because Mum, in fact, when she came back, she typed up the whole history of the trip from the time that they left until the time they came home. So we still have all that in writing in a little bound copy, which I have here. And then when they came back, they corresponded then for 3 years, writing 2-3 letters a week or a month, or Mum was always giving, because I still have all their letters.
I mean, just the notion of people writing letters. Everyone now is on emailing, texting.
Yeah.
The letters are very,
So
very
so you'd write a letter. And in fact, the postal service was very efficient then, because even my aunts used to write to my mum, and they were in Dublin, and you'd send a letter today and it would be there tomorrow. And then they'd write straight away to reply with the news and that, because again, we didn't have a phone, obviously. And so I kept all the letters, but Mum was always giving out to Daddy for not writing back very quickly. And she was very fluent. Mum was very clever. and very fluent writer, right until the last few years, when unfortunately she got carpal tunnel syndrome in her wrist and had an operation, and then she couldn't hold the pen for very long, which was really sad because it was her main method of communication. Now, she did have some voice because she lost her hearing at 5. So she would have been speaking, and hearing up to that, but she was one of 8 children. And Daddy was one of 8 as well. But his speech wouldn't have been as developed as Mum's. Why, I don't know. But I have a feeling that he went to Cabra a lot later than she went to school for the deaf.
So both of your parents were deaf?
Yes. So Mum went to the Mercy Convent in Rochford Bridge, which is in County Westmeath, near Athlone in the centre of Ireland. She went there for the first year because her grandaunt was a nun there. And they sent my aunt Una, Mum's sister, with her to keep her company. But the ironic thing was that they were both separated in school, because there was the hearing part of school and the deaf school. And they never met except for meals. So Daddy went to Cabra. He said he was very happy there. There was a swimming pool there. They used to go skating, ice skating. He was very sporty, lots of activities. He enjoyed that. And after 3 years, they married, and Mum came to Tralee on the train with a big trunk, and which we still have, with her blankets and her lace work and on job. Because when she finished school, she said at 17, then the nuns decided that they would train her up to be what they call, I suppose, a special needs assistant now, an assistant teacher. And she remained on in Cabra until she was 32, until she got married. So she was effectively living a convent life, because she didn't live outside the school.
Yes.
So she and the other ladies that were there, they worked in the kitchen, or they taught lace work, or knitting, handcraft, all of that type of thing. So they spent a lot of time making things. And we used to visit Cabra then every 7 years. There used to, or was it every 7 years? Was it? There used to be a retreat. And so all the women would come. And I was one of the few children that came to the retreat. Probably because I was an only child, and probably because there wasn't anybody else to take care of me.
Right.
I'm really not quite sure. But I remember Mum not being happy with me learning sign language, because all the other women were trying to teach me sign, and Mum was like, no. Because Mum was a bit different in one way, in that she always wanted the deafness to be discreet and not to be defined by it. Because in a country town, people point, and
certainly then it would have.
Yeah, if you were doing this and whatever out on the street, it would be sort of like drawing attention to yourself, So it was just, be quiet and be discreet and whatever. And she had learned, the oralism, the sign language developed then into oralism, and then it's now gone back to a mix of both. But she was a good lip reader, and she didn't want to lose her skill. So she felt that she would not lip read very well if I began to sign, whereas I wanted to sign. But and Daddy then, of course, had his own signs, as you probably know, that the male and the female signs were different. And so being on my own, I think at home, I could never really understand what they were saying to each other, because Daddy would use his signs and then Mum would use hers.
And yet, if you'd had sign language between you, you would have been able to share more.
we did, but to me, there's a big difference. I'm not sure about Catherine, between the male and the female signs. And the women always seem to learn the men's signs, and the men never seem to learn the women's signs. But that's a whole other other issue.
Tell me about your father, because he also is quite unusual. It was unusual that your mother taught, if you like, and for quite a
Yes,
long time. But also,
yes.
your father was quite unusual in that we, I've got a little idea of it, but tell us what your
Yeah.
father did and the nature of
Yeah,
his
so
work.
Daddy, at the time in St. Joseph's, I really think that way back in the day, they really prepared men for going out into the world and being independent and having a trade and having a skill, which I think was wonderful because in that way they were able to earn a living, and be as good as the next person and not again be defined by what would have been called the handicap, of deafness. So Daddy trained then to be a tailor. He did an apprenticeship for 7 years in Tralee, and then he went to Cork and did more training in a shop that's a very old historic shop called O'Dwyer's in Washington Street. And he remained there for, I think it was 3 years, because my uncle Paddy, his brother, went to work in CIE, which was the transport company for the trains and buses. So he trained to be a mechanic. So the two of them were lodging together, and again, there was always that where there was like mum had Una in school to a point, but Daddy always had the brothers and the family here. And obviously when they got married, he decided to set up his own business before he got married. And he was lucky in that his uncle was able to rent him a small shop space right at the back of his own shop, which sold shoes.
Okay.
So he rented that to him then at £1 a year.
Goodness.
And he was to have that for the rest of his life.
And he
So
also employed people, didn't he?
he did, yeah. And you see, he had the support, he had the premises, if you like, and then began himself. And then as somebody said to me there recently, an old man who used to come from Macroom in County Cork to Daddy, he said, your father wasn't a tailor. He said he was an artist, because he felt he was so skilled at what he did. And his first employee was a Mr. Coffey who lived down the road here, and a small man. I'll always remember him sitting cross-legged on the bench. And then Catherine's father, Michael, came to work with him. Larry was working with him. Michael Fell worked with him. And I often wondered how Mr. Coffey got on, because the people around him were all deaf and he was the only hearing person, But it was a very simple shop, very basic, one big mirror and a few benches at the front and at the back. Yeah. And cold, with a small little paraffin heater. And but it was downtown in a little lane which was called the Market Passage, and it literally led from the main street into what was the market, where they sold vegetables and sheep and cattle and all that kind of thing. And it was a great meeting place because people were always going in and out of the passage. And in fact, my grandmother, my father's mother, had a little what they called a creamery way back then, because she was widowed young. So she had a little shop where she sold milk from the farm. And the oldest uncle on the farm, had to leave school at 12 and go ploughing and growing vegetables and keeping cows and milking. And she would bake. And so they sold all their home produce in the little shop in the passageway. So they were kind of a well-known family in that sense, and people would just pass by and just pop in and say hello. Way back in the day, things were different. People socialized in a different way,
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And how then? How did they guide you into, if you like, going out into the world and working?
I suppose mum always taught me to be fiercely independent, simply because I was an only child. But now I lived in every other house in the neighborhood, where there were 7 girls, between the next door's houses. So I was always next door with the others. They never really came into our house, because And I think I was trying to explain this on the other thing as well, that even in later years, when we had new neighbors and they had children, they would visit the other elderly neighbors with their children for Halloween, you know, and but they never came to mum, because they said, well, we wouldn't be able to communicate with them. But I mean, they thought the communication was solely speaking and nothing else, you know. Whereas with the costumes and everything else, it's so like that's communication in another way. And
It
a
is,
lot of, yeah, but a lot of people would have felt that, and I very much felt that in latter years, that they kind of felt, they didn't feel it, but I felt for them that they missed out on what the others had. And the only reason being is that, you know, they weren't blind, but they just couldn't hear. But what did it matter, you know? And I still think that there was a cousin of my father's in hospital, and I said, you know, I would have loved to have visited him if I had known he was in hospital and he was unwell. And they said, but you couldn't have communicated with him. But, you know, like, communication is just touching somebody's hand. Do you know what I mean? It
it is, Mary Jo, but I suppose that's what I meant at the very beginning.
yeah.
As some, if you're somebody who has had no engagement
Mm,
at all with a deaf person,
mm,
people like, and this is what I discovered the more that I suppose that I met different people who either had deaf parents or were deaf,
mm,
because, as I say, I sort of jumped in straight in, if you like, and met quite a few people fairly quickly.
mm.
But I realised that it was my fear of looking stupid. It was
Well, yeah, yeah.
it's, you know, as a hearing person who has
Mm,
no exposure to the deaf community,
mm,
people are, and it is a very blinkered way of
mhm, mhm,
being and
mhm.
reacting, but it feels safer not
Mhm.
to
Not
risk
to, yeah,
offending somebody. And maybe in some way your parents maybe recognized that
nice
it was
that,
safer
yeah, yeah.
in their
Mm,
world,
mhm, mhm,
but you were in between worlds.
mm,
You know, you were
mm,
very much like many people
mhm,
like you, the
mhm,
bridge between the two worlds.
mm,
So
mm,
you're seeing what could be
mhm.
from both sides, but the two sides, it's, you need somebody to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Mm,
So
mm.
it's a
Yeah,
very
that's true.
human.
Mm.
It's a
Actually,
very
thank you for saying that, because I've never really acknowledged that, you know. I was probably looking at it from a very kind of simplistic point of view. But one thing that I found, though, that used to puzzle people, because people would insult you, you know, and say that your parents were dummies, and you know, you have all that stuff that you bury for ages, and then no more than maybe the normal person, whatever has been buried kind of just keeps coming up and up. So it was great at the Coda thing to actually see in Paris, to see that there were other people experiencing the same feelings as I was, of, you know, of anger and frustration with society at large, you know,
and,
for always sort of targeting, you know, the people who were different, you
and
know.
it's very hard. Must still um, hurt to think back
Mm,
on
mm.
really those experiences.
It does far less so now. But there were times, I think even going to the Coda conference in Paris kind of helped me a lot, because again, because I was an only child and I never discussed this with other people.
Mm.
And let's say the whites, you see, were you've got to realize that in a small town like Tralee, you know, the whites had two families, right? There were 12 kids, right? And was it five were all deaf and the other seven were hearing? Do you know what I mean? And they were a gang unto themselves. And I always kind of felt, you know, sugar, I don't have anybody. I had nobody else of my age in the town, you know, that I could maybe share my feelings with, or that. And I think that's what kind of maybe hurt me most, you know. and that if I was bullied or if I was taunted, didn't have anybody, you know. Obviously I wouldn't come home and say anything to my parents, you know, because again, you become very protective, you know, of them. And you know, even that kind of brings up stuff, because I still see people and think, you know, and maybe I think, you know, I remember what you said all those years ago. And I say, like, why can't I forget this? I've let it go, kind of thing. But at the same time, there's still a little bit of residual, you know, annoyance and anger there, you know.
Well, I
But
think we're all children at heart, and I think
I
we
guess.
all always are. And if there are
Mm,
difficulties, particularly in our school days, we
mm,
think we've dealt with it and processed it.
mm,
But
mm,
every now and then in later life, things come up, and you feel
mm,
that feeling coming up
mm,
again.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
so I can understand that.
Mm,
I can understand that. And
yeah.
bullying
Mm-hmm,
is something is happening, but with different medium now.
mm-hmm,
So whilst
mm,
technology has really helped a lot of
mm-hmm,
deaf people
mm-hmm,
to engage, and it's it's just another way of communicating. It can bring it with it its own
mm-hmm,
problems. And as you
mm,
say, bullying is always there.
mm-hmm.
It just travels through different medium, really. But if
Very
you
true.
were, I'd like to just go back before we move on, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. That's a real Irishism, going backwards to come forwards. Take me to Paris. Take me to Paris. What took you to Paris? And
The
was it some?
whites. Yeah, because you see, I suppose, you know, growing up then, mum sent me, you know, I was sent away to school to the Dominicans, at the other end of the country, up in Wicklow near Dublin, because mum wanted me to be educated by the Dominicans, because she valued the education that she had with them, you know. And so when I went away, this was part of a journey that mum was sending me on as well, because even when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, you know, I was always sent away to camp to help the handicapped, right? So I would spend 3 weeks every summer with people who were disabled in various different ways. And God knows, even the people who had epilepsy were considered to be handicapped way back then, you know. So and then going on to college, because I went on to do teaching myself, but that didn't last very long. And so I went into tourism because I talk a lot, I suppose. And my French was good, but mum, you see, mum would always push, you know, to get, not to be the best in the class, but to do the best that I could. And because again, like that, she valued education, and I very much appreciate that, you know, from the way that she reared me, if you like. And I know that the girls that I was in school with now, I was away for years, you see, and I only came home in latter years to take care of my parents. And the girls would say, "Oh, I'll always remember your mother coming into school, you know, and writing down and quizzing the teachers and asking about this, that, and the other." Whereas they sort of looked at me and kind of thought, I hated it at the time, but they said, you know, we're kind of envious now of what your mother did way back then, because really our mothers weren't really interested, as long as we behaved,
Yeah.
you know, it didn't really matter. So I've had a whole life in tourism, which has been wonderful. And then Paris came up simply because I've had a little bit more contact, I think, with the Deaf Resource Centre in Tralee in latter years, because when I came home to work so that I could be close to my parents, mum used to go into craft classes, or she would go in and meet the other ladies, you know, and they'd have a chat and a cup of tea and socialize, because she couldn't drive. And this was something that was created, you know, when the Deaf Resource Centre was created. It was called the Deaf Centre. Was it called the Deaf Centre? Yeah, it was called the Deaf Centre. And they raised all that money by themselves. They went out, you know, going around town, and mum was going into the offices upstairs, because she said the people upstairs never come downtown, you know, in the street to give money to the, you know, when you were collecting money. and in shoe boxes covered in brown paper, not like the plastic buckets they use now. And so they had that place themselves to socialize, with themselves, which is wonderful, and it's still there. So because I was away so much, I really only connected with the community when I came back to live in Tralee full time, which was only 20 years ago. And because
great involvement since.
Well, yes, yeah. And then you see, getting to know the whites from a different point of view, getting to know them as adults rather than as children, and then of course they're all, they're pretty much, nearly every one of them is involved in some way, with the deaf community and that. And then you see a lot of the deaf people that were in Tralee, the women particularly, had been taught by my mother when they were in school. So there's still two ladies, and we meet for a monthly mass in Killarney, and at the Franciscans, and Mary Fell and Mary O'Brien, they both come to the mass still, and they're in maybe their early 80s, but we still talk about Cabra and the old days and Mum, and then all the other people that I got to know in the last 20 years, as in Catherine's mother, rather, should I say, and then her aunt, and Larry, her uncle, and it was so. In fact, the deaf community was never part of my life really until my own adulthood, until I was in my 40s.
And it's interesting for me to hear you referencing I suppose the different people who've come back into your life. Because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, if you like, with the benefit of hindsight, what would you advise the parents of either deaf parents of a hearing child, or the other way around? What would your advice be to a family who is dealing with deafness?
I don't even know that, I'll be honest with you, that I would even be qualified to give them any advice, in the sense that life now is so different from what my life was like. We were a very close-knit neighborhood, family. Now I think that families are much more dispersed. You don't have the same support systems in that.
I suppose I'm thinking of sign language itself.
Oh, well, I mean, sign language, absolutely, I would consider to be essential. Absolutely essential. But like, I have hearing friends who have deaf children that I've only got to know in recent years. And again, the age profile, their son is in his 40s, let's say, but the mother can sign, but the father can't. The father has a bit of a block, in communicating with his son, because his son is deaf. He's never really got over that, whereas the mother has. But I don't know whether it's because the mother, because of a caring role, and that, somebody has to be able to communicate properly. But all I can say is that, there seems to be so much technology out there now that can help, that there's really no excuse for both parties not to learn and to understand each other. But I have to say, I have a little bit of a problem though with integration in schools, because I don't think the services are there for young deaf children, and they're very much losing out. Like I had said to you before, that Daddy could write, Mum could write for All Ireland, she's writing away, and to people that we would have considered to be hearing and gone to school. So then you automatically put them on a different level and say, well, their education must have been superior. But in fact, the education for the deaf way back was far superior to what there is now, from what I can see and from what I hear. And I think that's really something that both parties have to push for.
I mean, I would love to see ISL on the curriculum. I'm hearing different things on whether different programs. I mean, somebody I know at the moment, she's just 21, and one of her modules at college is with ISL.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's a very minor part of it. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that, like everything, unless you keep it up and
Mm-hmm.
becomes an everyday practice,
Practice,
you're
yeah.
going to forget. And
Yeah.
I just feel that there's an opportunity within schools to
Mm-hmm.
have something every day, even if it's just
Mm-hmm.
learning a few phrases, a few words, that can
Mm-hmm.
just encourage that inclusion.
Include, yes, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know,
As
kids
you said,
learn
yeah.
so quickly. Kids learn
Mm-hmm.
so quickly.
Yeah, they do, and they're enthusiastic. It's like I'm very much involved with groups in terms of biodiversity and nature and gardening and all of that. And when I see what's happening in schools, I'm thrilled because they now have polytunnels, and the kids are going out and they're growing vegetables and they're doing all these things that kids are so receptive,
They are. I
you
mean,
know.
something I suppose came up in another conversation, and what I and there's a link in something you said earlier, because you said your parents, when they were young and met, they were brought up to be independent,
Mm-hmm,
and you saw that as an essential skill. And I think
mm-hmm,
that should be for all youngsters,
mm-hmm,
but definitely within, if you like, the deaf community.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
what I'm concerned about is that there is work, obviously, for, and we don't have enough Irish Sign Language
mm-hmm,
interpreters.
mm-hmm,
There's obviously two sets of, if you like, you have coders, you have coders, and those who come from, if you like, the academic training to be
mm-hmm,
interpreters.
mm-hmm.
So, if you
Oh
like,
yes.
the
Mm-hmm,
two schools
mm-hmm,
there of practitioners. But it seems to me, and this, do excuse me if this is a very
mm-hmm,
ignorant observation, that there are a lot of deaf people who could help facilitate the learning of sign language
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm.
schools. That
Yes.
that there has to be a way of one
Mm-hmm.
creating additional employment in that level, whether it's the category of an assistant
Yeah.
as opposed to a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But there has to be a way. There have to be opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just becoming familiar so that, nitwits like me aren't fearful of getting it wrong. Back to the child in all of us. It's, oh, don't go there because I might get it wrong and I might upset somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's get out of our own way and
Yeah.
learn
Mm-hmm.
a few basics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
But you see, look, you um how would I say, even in the wheelchair association, they'll tell you, and mum was in a wheelchair for the last 3 years of her life, right? That even with hearing people, they talk to the person pushing the chair, they don't talk to the person in the chair. So if there's an issue at that basic level where everybody can hear and speak,
so
it's a huge challenge.
maybe there's a course or part of the curriculum that
Mm,
is more to do with critical thinking and social awareness,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because kids learn faster, quicker. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you talk to kids about these days, whether you're talking about somebody who's gay,
Mm-hmm,
whatever it is, they just accept
yeah.
difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's the adults who need to be learning from the children.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Mm-hmm.
Mary Jo, I've learnt a lot, and what I do want to do is, next time I'm in the kingdom,
Oh, come and visit.
to come and see you.
Sure, you can come down to the museum and see the trunk.
I just think you have so much there, between the letters from your parents,
Mm,
the just to even do audio recordings of their
mm-hmm,
letters maybe there's a male that you can invite from Catherine's family, who could do your father's voice
Oh, I
and
know.
read
Yeah,
the
yeah,
letters.
yeah, yeah.
But I think they're so important. They're so
Hmm.
much part of our social history.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
really is. I mean, look at the scarlet fever that both of your parents had.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
certainly caused
Hmm.
deafness on one side for them. There's so much that we can't
Hmm.
lose, and sharing your story is going to make sure that
Hmm.
that part of growing
Hmm.
up in Tralee with deaf parents who are fiercely independent
Hmm.
and gave so much to you,
Hmm.
that won't be lost. So we will talk again.
Hmm.
Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, yeah, I know,
Thank
I
you
would like
hugely,
that. And no, very
I'd,
much.
I'd,
Yeah,
I'd love
I
that.
would very.
And
No,
Catherine,
I would very much like,
thank you.
yes, if you, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Or come and stay. Don't be short of a bed.
You're on. You're on.
Mhm.
Thank you
Mhm.
both very much. And the embarrassment is, all I can say is thank you.
Thank you.
That says it all, doesn't it?
I know. No, but I enjoyed it, and thank you. It was I wasn't sure quite what to expect, and I didn't want to be creating any preconceived notions in my head about what might or might not happen,
Well,
or
well, you
what.
haven't, and I'm going to stop the recording and then we can have a
Yes,
natter.
perfect. Yeah, that's grand. Lovely.